when three German shepherds walked out of the shadows of a grocery store parking lot. People thought they were strays. They weren't. They moved like soldiers, disciplined, deliberate, as if guarding something unseen. One, with a scar tracing his muzzle, stopped beside a little girl sitting alone in a car. The child didn't scream. She only stared, wide-eyed, sensing not danger, but destiny. Moments later, her stepmother came out, Grace Sanders. A woman whose scars ran deeper than skin. She froze at the sight of those dogs, fear clawing up from old memories. But when one lowered its head and looked at her with calm, human understanding, something inside her shifted. On their collars, she found metal canisters, messages from a missing man, a retired K-9 officer who may already be gone. The letter inside would lead Grace and her family into a journey of love, loss, and redemption. A journey that began not with words, but with eyes that refused to give up hope. They weren't lost dogs, they were coming home. The late afternoon sun sagged low over the Tennessee hills, bleeding gold through the supermarket windows and spilling across rows of half-empty cars. The world outside seemed still, quiet in that peculiar way small towns get before dusk, when everything holds its breath. Inside a faded blue sedan, Lily Sanders sat strapped in her booster seat, tiny legs dangling, hands wrapped tight around a frayed stuffed bunny named Snowy. The air inside smelled faintly of French fries and Grace's vanilla hand lotion. 6 years old, and already Lily had learned to fill silence with imagination. She traced shapes in the fog her breath left on the window. First a heart, then a crooked star. Her stepmother Grace had promised she'd be just 5 minutes. Grace always said that, and it was never true. The supermarket's automatic doors hissed open and shut, the only movement in the near-empty lot. Then, from somewhere between the last row of parked cars, a shadow shifted. Lily leaned forward, squinting. Another shape followed, heavier, deliberate. At first she thought they were men, but then came the low, rhythmic thud of paws against pavement. 3 German shepherds emerged from the dim edges of the lot, huge, muscled silhouettes moving with eerie precision. Their coats caught the dying sunlight in flashes of bronze and black. They didn't wander like strays. They advanced, steady, synchronized, silent. Lily's pulse stumbled. Snowy pressed tighter to her chest. One of them, the largest, had a jagged scar running along its muzzle, a pale mark carving through dark fur like lightning over night sky. He stopped a few feet from the car and lifted his head, eyes amber and intelligent. For a long second, the world seemed to hold its breath with Lily. Then, with a soft grunt, the scarred dog, Rex, rose on, his hind legs planting his paws against the driver's side window. The glass quivered under his weight. His breath fogged the surface inches from Lily's face. She could smell it through the crack of the vent, earthy, wild, alive. Her small heart hammered. But it wasn't pure fear. Something inside her, the part that still believed in magic, felt he wasn't here to hurt her. He was looking for something, or someone. 2 others circled the car. Titan, broad-shouldered, his gait slightly limping, and Bella, smaller and sleek, eyes sharp as a hawk's. They moved like soldiers falling into formation, one watching the rear, one scanning the sides. Lily whispered, "Hi." Her voice trembled, almost lost in the hum of the evening. Rex tilted his head, ears pricking, as if he'd heard and understood. A gust of wind rattled a shopping cart nearby, and Bella swung her head toward the sound instantly. Reflexive, protective. Not strays, Lily thought again. Guard dogs. Just then, the supermarket doors slid open. Grace stepped out, juggling 2 grocery bags, her dark blonde hair whipped by the wind. The moment she saw the car, saw 3 massive shepherds surrounding it, she froze mid-step. The bags slipped from her hands. Apples rolled across the pavement. Grace's breath caught in her throat. For a heartbeat, she wasn't 35. She was 9 again, trapped in her childhood backyard. The Rottweiler's growl vibrating through her bones before it lunged. The memory flashed like lightning. Teeth, panic, the crimson stain on her forearm that never fully faded. Her knees threatened to buckle, but then she saw Lily, her stepdaughter, inside the car, wide-eyed yet calm. A tiny hand pressed against the glass near Rex's muzzle. Training overrode terror. Grace steadied her breath, dropped her purse, and took a cautious step forward. "Easy," she whispered, voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves. "Good dogs. It's okay." Rex's gaze flicked from Lily to Grace. Titan adjusted his stance. None growled. None barked. Their discipline was unmistakable. Grace crouched low, palms open in the universal gesture of peace. She spoke softly, each word chosen like she was diffusing a bomb. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just need to get to the girl, all right?" She extended one trembling hand. Her wrist tremored, the scar there tightening as if remembering its history. Rex lowered himself slowly, paws leaving the window. The other 2 mirrored him. For the first time, Grace noticed collars, thick, weathered leather with small cylindrical canisters attached. Something official about them. "Collars?" she murmured. Curiosity began to edge out fear. Grace took a slow step closer. No hackles raised, no teeth bared. Only those steady eyes, following her every move. She reached toward Rex's neck, fingers brushing metal. The cylinder was scratched, but intact, sealed with a twist cap. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she unscrewed it. Inside was a rolled sheet of waterproof paper and a small photograph protected in plastic. The photo showed an elderly man in a police uniform, seated with 3 shepherds. These same 3. His hand rested on Rex's head, pride softening his stern eyes. Grace unrolled the note. The handwriting was shaky, uneven but deliberate. "My name is Officer Robert H. Cole, retired K-9 unit. If you're reading this, I may have passed or been forced to leave my home. These dogs, Rex, Titan, and Bella, served beside me for years. They are trained protectors, loyal beyond measure. Please keep them together. They deserve peace, not cages. God bless whoever shows them kindness." Grace read it twice, her throat tightening. The man's words felt like a plea, whispered from the grave. She looked up at the 3 shepherds sitting motionless before her, awaiting, it seemed, her verdict. "Grace?" The small voice came from inside the car. Lily had rolled the window down an inch. The child's face was pale but steady. "They're not bad," she said softly. "They were waiting for someone who wouldn't be scared." Grace's mouth parted, but no words came. In that moment, under the dying light, between fear and compassion, she realized this little girl, who'd lost her mother too soon, saw something she herself had forgotten. Sometimes the things we fear most are the ones sent to save us. Rex gave a low, patient whine, as if urging her to decide. Grace's breath trembled. She slid her trembling fingers into the pocket of her scrub jacket, feeling the keys to the car, the symbol of safety, of control. Then she looked at Lily, whose hazel eyes glowed with hope. "All right," Grace whispered. "We'll help them." She reached for the handle, pulled the driver's side door open, and stepped aside. The hinge groaned. Rex didn't move. He waited for her signal. "Come on," Grace said, voice gentler now. It's okay. The three dogs advanced, not lunging, not rushing, but walking in deliberate unison toward her and the car. When Rex stopped beside Grace, so she caught the reflection of his amber eyes in the window. Steady, ancient, kind. For the first time in 25 years, Grace didn't back away. She reached out, laid her palm against his head, and felt warmth ripple through her fear. Behind her, Lily exhaled a small, breathless laugh, the sound of a child rediscovering safety. The world around them seemed to hush. Even the wind paused. It's time. In that fragile silence, a new bond was sealed. Between woman, child, and the ghosts of loyalty that had walked out of the shadows to find them. Grace, despite her phobia, opens the car door to the dogs, her first true act of courage. The road home wound through rolling Tennessee fields that glowed dull gold beneath the dying light. The hum of the sedan's old engine filled the silence between Grace and the child beside her. In the back seat, three shadows breathed quietly, Rex's head resting between the front seats, Titan curled against the door, Bella sitting upright as if standing guard. Grace's hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. Every few seconds she checked the rearview mirror, half expecting those disciplined eyes to vanish like a dream. Yet they stayed, steady, obedient, strangely calm. Beside her, Lily stroked Snowy's worn fur with one hand and reached the other toward Bella, whose muzzle rested on the seat edge. "They know where we're going," she murmured. Grace forced a small smile. "I hope so, sweetheart, because I'm not sure I do." When the tires crunched onto the gravel drive of the Sanders farm, dusk had deepened into bruised purple. The farmhouse stood lonely against the tree line, paint peeling, porch light flickering, as if tired of fighting the dark. The old barn leaned slightly east, its roof patched with tin that glimmered faintly under the first stars. Mark's pickup was already parked beside the porch. The sight made Grace's stomach tighten. She hadn't planned how to explain this. Mark emerged before she could kill the headlights, a tall, broad-shouldered man with construction dust still on his boots, exhaustion etched into every movement. His face, once open and kind, had become a map of silent grief. He stopped short when he saw the dogs climb out of the car one by one, their size and precision impossible to ignore. "What in God's name?" he started, voice low and incredulous. Grace opened her door, keeping her tone calm. "They're trained police dogs. We found them." "You found them." He barked out a humorless laugh, stepping closer. "We can't even feed ourselves, Grace, and now you're rescuing half the police department?" The words hit like gravel. Grace stiffened, swallowing the defensive retort that rose in her throat. "There was a note," she said softly. "Their owner may have passed. They needed somewhere safe." "Safe?" Mark's voice sharpened. "Do you have any idea how much 3 animals that size eat? How much they cost if they get sick?" Lily had climbed out quietly, Snowy pressed to her chest. "They won't hurt us," she whispered. "They found us, Daddy." Mark turned toward his daughter. His anger faltered. The last time she'd spoken more than a sentence had been months ago. Now her small voice carried conviction. "They found you?" he echoed. Lily nodded. They were waiting. For a long moment, the only sounds were the chirp of crickets and Titan's low breathing. Then Mark exhaled, a long, weary sound. He rubbed a hand over his face. "Lord help me." Grace caught something flicker behind his tired eyes, something like surrender, or maybe fear of breaking that fragile light that had returned to his daughter's face. "Autant." "Fine," he said finally, "but they stay outside. Barn only." Grace nodded, relief and anxiety colliding. That's all I ask. They led the dogs toward the barn. The night air smelled of hay and damp wood. Inside, moonlight cut through the gaps in the siding, striping the dirt floor in silver. Grace spread old blankets across the corner stall. The dogs entered in perfect order. Rex first, Titan limping slightly, Bella last. They moved as if measuring the space for threats. Lily crouched near them, fearless. She reached out a tiny hand. Rex lowered his head so she could touch the scar along his muzzle. He didn't flinch. Titan lay down beside her, and Bella circled once before settling opposite, forming a loose triangle around the child. Grace felt her throat tighten. It wasn't random. It looked practiced, protective. Mark leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching with wary fascination. They act like soldiers. They are, Grace murmured. Or were. Lily giggled when Titan licked her sleeve. The sound, light, unguarded, made Grace's eyes sting. It had been a year since laughter lived in that barn. Later, after Lily was tucked into bed, Mark lingered at the kitchen table, head bowed over an unpaid electric bill. Grace washed the few dishes in silence. Every small noise, the clink of a plate, the groan of the faucet, felt louder than it should. Finally, he said, without looking up, "You did good today at the clinic. They said you stayed late." Grace dried her hands. "I didn't. I was with the dogs." He sighed. "Grace, we're 3 months behind on the mortgage. If we lose this place—" "I know," she interrupted softly. "But they needed help." He pushed the bill aside. "So do we." His voice wasn't cruel, just bone-tired. She wanted to tell him that maybe helping them was helping her, that since she'd touched Rex's head, something had shifted inside. But she couldn't form the words. Instead, she said, "Lily smiled tonight." That silenced him. He looked up, truly looked. And for the first time in months, his expression softened. Grace took that as enough. Outside, the night thickened. Mist drifted low over the fields, swallowing the fences. Somewhere in that white quiet, a single bark echoed. Deep, measured, not fearful, but alert. Then another answered, and another. Grace stood by the bedroom window, watching through the haze. The barn's faint light glowed like a lantern in fog. Inside, she could just make out the shapes of the 3 shepherds shifting as Lily moved in her sleep on a blanket of hay. Rex lifted his head, scanning the horizon. Titan lay curled near the door, and Bella rested close to the child's feet. They looked like sentinels guarding a tiny kingdom of peace. Grace's heart ached with something she couldn't name. Half gratitude, half dread. She whispered to the dark, "What have we brought home?" The wind answered by rustling the trees, the faintest breath of autumn carrying across the fields. She slid into bed beside Mark, who was already half asleep. The farmhouse creaked and settled. From somewhere distant came the echo of dogs barking, low, steady, disciplined, as if calling to something unseen beyond the mist. Grace lay awake long after, staring at the ceiling where moonlight pooled in pale squares. She thought of scars, hers, Rex's, even the invisible ones Lily carried, and how sometimes wounds recognized each other before people did. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. Instead, she listened. Every bark, every sigh from the barn reminded her that peace could arrive looking like danger. Outside, the mist thickened until the barn vanished from sight. Only the sound remained. 3 loyal voices rising and falling in the Tennessee night, keeping watch over a family that had forgotten how to hope. Tension builds. A traumatized woman, a grieving child, 3 mysterious animals, and a family balanced on the edge between salvation and ruin. The first pale thread of dawn had barely touched the horizon when Grace pushed open the back door of the farmhouse. The air was damp and cold, the kind that carried every sound: the creak of hinges, the sigh of grass under her boots, the distant, steady rhythm of a rooster announcing morning. She clutched a flashlight in one hand and a small veterinary kit in the other. Its metal handle was slick with sweat. Fog wrapped the barn like a secret. When she slid the door open, it groaned softly, and 3 shapes lifted their heads from the straw. The beam of her flashlight caught the flash of amber eyes, alert but calm. "Easy, boys," she whispered, voice shaking more from memory than fear. "It's just me." Rex rose first, tall and unflinching, his outline cutting through the shadows like a sentinel carved from darkness. Titan followed, favoring one leg, and Bella stayed low beside the sleeping form of a child-sized blanket folded neatly in the corner. Lily's doing before bed. Grace's heart thudded. The dog's discipline was uncanny. No barking, no rush toward her. Just watchfulness. The smell of hay mixed with the faint tang of antiseptic from her kit, grounding her in something that felt both clinical and holy. She crouched slowly near Titan. The flashlight trembled as she angled it toward his injured paw. Beneath the matted fur, she saw a cut, clean but deep, perhaps from old wire. A human might flinch. Titan didn't move at all. "Good boy," she breathed. "We'll get this fixed up." She spoke to keep her own pulse steady, each word a fragile tether between terror and tenderness. The metallic click of scissors, the rustle of gauze, the smell of iodine, it all carried her back to the clinic, the one place she still believed she had control. Her fingers worked with precision, wrapping, securing, pressing gently until the bleeding stopped. Time, 900 ms. When the last piece of tape smoothed into place, she realized she was murmuring to herself, "You're okay. You're all right. I've got you." And maybe she wasn't only talking to him. From behind came a soft voice, almost part of the mist. "They like you now." Grace turned. Lily stood barefoot in the doorway, hair tangled from sleep, pajamas bunched around her ankles. The flashlight's beam brushed across her small face, eyes wide, cheeks pink from the cold. "You should be in bed," Grace whispered. "I woke up when they did." Lily stepped forward, unafraid. The straw crunched under her feet. "They know you're scared but brave." Grace froze. The words landed like a hand on her chest. Brave. No one had called her that since before the attack that had shaped half her life. Her throat tightened. "Brave, huh?" she managed, forcing a smile. "Not sure about that." Lily nodded solemnly. "They can tell. Dogs know what hearts feel like." Grace didn't answer. She couldn't. Titan nudged her arm with his muzzle, as if confirming the child's words. A slow, steady pressure that said, "You're doing fine. Go on inside, Lily. It's cold." But Lily stayed, crouching to run her small fingers along Bella's ear, whispering secrets Grace couldn't hear. The barn seemed to exhale, a quiet peace filling the space where fear used to live. For a few minutes, none of them moved. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the barn boards, soft and gold, touching Grace's face, Titan's bandaged paw, Lily's hair. It looked like forgiveness. By the time they returned to the kitchen, Mark was already at the table, work boots planted heavy on the floor, eyes shadowed from another night of too little sleep. The smell of coffee barely covered the metallic tang of dried hay, still clinging to Grace's clothes. No one spoke at first. The only sound was the slow scrape of Mark's fork against the plate, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator fighting its age. Grace poured herself a cup of coffee, hands still trembling faintly. Her palms smelled faintly of iodine and fur. Lily slid into her chair and began eating cereal without milk. Grace watched her, how she hummed softly to herself, how color had crept back into her face. Across the table, Mark looked up once, then away. He finally said, "You went out early." "Titan's paw needed cleaning," Grace replied. Mark grunted, not disapproving, but wary. "You sure you can handle them?" Grace sipped her coffee, eyes distant. "I'm handling it." That was all. She didn't tell him how she'd knelt on the cold barn floor whispering to a creature that could crush her hand with a single bite, or how, for the first time in years, her heart had pounded not from panic, but from something like purpose. Lily looked between them, sensing the unspoken words. Then, quietly, she said, "They're part of us now." Mark didn't answer. His fork scraped again, louder this time, but he didn't argue. Grace felt a faint tremor of warmth, fragile understanding growing where only silence had lived. After breakfast, Lily carried her bowl to the sink. Bella followed her, patting soundlessly on the worn kitchen tiles. The shepherd sat, watching every motion with calm intelligence. When Lily dropped the spoon with a clatter, Bella flinched but didn't move away. Instead, she lowered her head into the girl's lap. Lily's small hand settled gently on the dog's neck. No words were needed. The connection shimmered in the morning light, a child who'd lost too much, and an animal who understood loss in its bones. Grace stood by the counter, pretending to rinse her cup, eyes glistening. The quiet scene unfolded like something sacred. She thought of the letter in her coat pocket, the old man's plea that his dogs find peace. Maybe this was what he meant. Through the open window drifted the faint chorus of the other two shepherds in the yard, low whines and the shuffle of paws over gravel. The house no longer felt empty. It felt guarded. Mark rose from the table, reaching for his jacket. "I'll be late tonight," he said, tone gentler than before. The edge softened. "They behave, you can keep them one more day." Grace nodded. "They'll behave." When the door closed behind him, the sound of his truck faded into the distance, leaving behind a fragile silence. Grace turned toward her stepdaughter and the dog at her side. "Lily," she said softly. The girl looked up. Grace smiled, a small, trembling thing, but real. "Thank you for calling me brave." Lily grinned, the gap between her front teeth showing. "You were." Outside, the sun broke fully over the fields, spilling warmth through the kitchen window. It caught the sheen of Bella's fur, the curve of Grace's smile, and the rising steam from a forgotten cup of coffee. The day began not with fear, but with quiet companionship, a woman rediscovering her strength, a child reclaiming laughter, and three loyal creatures who had already chosen this broken little family as their new pack. By mid-morning the next day, the sky hung low and heavy, a dull gray pressing down on the hills. Grace sat in the clinic's back office, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. On the table before her lay a printout from the microchip scanner, its green light still blinking. She'd taken the dogs one by one that morning, Rex, Titan, and Bella, to scan them while Lily waited outside. The screen had shown 3 identical lines of registration that made her breath catch. Owner: Officer Robert H. Cole, Retired K-9 Division, Nashville PD. Status: inactive. Reported missing 6 weeks ago. Grace stared at the paper, the black text swimming slightly. The name tugged at her memory. She'd heard it once from a colleague, a story whispered about a legendary officer who trained dogs so loyal they'd follow him through fire. But missing? That was something else. Her fingers hovered over her phone. After a moment's hesitation, she dialed a number she hadn't used in years. Sergeant Daniels, her old contact from the police veterinary network. It rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. Daniels? Hey, it's Grace Sanders. Used to be Grace Miller back when I worked with K9 Rehab at the county shelter. There was a pause, then a surprised laugh. Grace? Well, I'll be damned. Thought you gave up dogs after He stopped himself, realizing the line he was crossing. After you left. Grace forced a small smile. Yeah, life got, complicated. Listen, I found something you might want to hear. 3 German shepherds, military-trained behavior. Their chips trace back to a Robert Cole. Does that name ring a bell? Another pause. The tone in Daniels's voice shifted. Cole? Hell yes. He was one of the old-school guys, K9 legend. Last I heard, he retired to the countryside after his wife died. There was talk he went missing. Cops found his house empty, door open, no signs of foul play. Just his dogs gone. Why? You saying you've got them? Grace swallowed. Yeah. They found us, actually. Daniels let out a low whistle. If those are Cole's dogs, you've got something special on your hands. Be careful with them. They're trained for protection, not pets. And Grace, you might want to check on that man. Sometimes these dogs don't just run off. They search. The word hit deep. Search. She hung up and stared out the window. The fog hadn't lifted. If anything, it had thickened, curling around the trees like memory itself. When she got home that afternoon, Mark was pacing the porch. We need to talk, he said the moment she stepped out of the truck. About what? He gestured toward the barn. About them. Grace, this is getting out of hand. We're not a rescue center. They could be dangerous. They're not dangerous. They're police dogs, Grace, trained to attack on command. You don't know their triggers, their past. Before she could respond, a small voice cut through the rising tension. They're not strays! Lily stood in the doorway, fists balled, eyes bright with tears. They're looking for someone. You don't understand. Mark froze. Lily never raised her voice, certainly not to him. They found us, she went on, words trembling but fierce. They're scared. They miss him. Grace knelt, placing a hand on Lily's shoulder. Who, sweetheart? Who do they miss? Lily looked toward the barn. The man from the picture. The one who wrote the letter. Mark rubbed his temples. Grace, listen to yourself. This is getting time 400 moms. Enough, Grace said quietly, surprising even herself. Just let them stay a little longer, please. Mark stared at her for a long moment, the fight leaving his shoulders. Fine, he muttered. But if anything goes wrong, anything, you call the shelter. He turned, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed long after he was gone. That night, rain began to fall. First a whisper, then a steady percussion against the tin roof. Lightning stitched the sky, illuminating the fields in brief flashes of white. Grace sat in bed with a book she wasn't reading, the lamplight trembling with every rumble of thunder. Mark snored softly beside her, oblivious. Then she heard it. A faint creak from the hallway. Soft footsteps. Lily? She whispered, setting the book aside. No answer. She grabbed a robe and padded barefoot through the dark. The front door hung slightly open, letting in a ribbon of wet wind. Her heart lurched. She stepped outside into the storm, rain soaking her hair in seconds. Lightning split the sky, and in that blinding flash, she saw it. The barn door ajar, golden light spilling through. Grace sprinted, her breath sharp in the cold air. Inside, the sight stopped her cold. Lily sat curled on the straw floor between Rex and Titan, her small hands resting on their backs. The dogs pressed close, their bodies forming a living cocoon around her. Bella lay at her feet, head resting on the child's knees. Lily's lips moved, whispering to them. Grace's voice broke. "Lily, what are you doing out here?" The girl looked up, eyes glimmering in the lantern's light. "They're scared," she said simply. "They miss him. Bella says he's sick." Grace knelt beside her, trembling. "Who told you that?" "They did," Lily whispered. "When it thundered, they got sad, like they remembered him being sick." A chill ran through Grace. She looked at the dogs. None barked, none stirred. Just 3 pairs of eyes reflecting the light, watchful and impossibly knowing. Then she saw it. A dark patch of fur on Titan's side, glistening faintly under the lantern. Blood. "Oh no," she murmured, moving closer. "Hold still, sweetheart." Grace fetched her medical kit from the shelf, hands shaking. Titan flinched when she touched the wound. A deep gash hidden beneath thick fur. It wasn't from farm wire. This was recent, clean, almost surgical, like the edge of metal. Lightning flashed again, and for a moment the barn seemed alive with ghosts. The smell of rain, the echo of barking, the breath of 3 hearts beating as one. Grace's tears mixed with rainwater dripping from her hair. "Who are you really, old boy?" she whispered. "What have you been through?" Rex stepped forward, pressing his head against her shoulder. Not roughly, just enough to steady her shaking hands. Bella moved closer to Lily, licking the child's wrist as thunder rolled above. Grace finished wrapping the wound, fingers tracing the bandage as if sealing a promise. When she looked up, Lily had fallen asleep against Bella's side. The storm had softened to a drizzle, and the only sound left was the dogs breathing, slow, steady, protective. Grace brushed a strand of wet hair from Lily's face, her eyes filling with quiet wonder. In their shared silence, woman, child, and animals, something unseen passed between them. For the first time, Grace understood that the walls she'd built out of fear weren't keeping her safe. They were keeping her alone. She pressed her forehead against Titan's neck, whispering through tears, "You're safe now. All of you are." Outside, the thunder faded into distance. Inside the barn, the faint rhythm of breathing filled the space where lightning had been. 3 quiet days passed after the storm. The fields had dried, but the air around the Sanders farm still carried that after-rain heaviness, as though the earth itself hadn't yet decided if it wanted to let go of what it had witnessed. Rex, Titan, and Bella stayed close to the house, always alert, always watchful. They seemed calmer now, but not peaceful, as if waiting for something only they could sense. Grace noticed it in their pacing, in the way they would sometimes lift their heads toward the road, ears twitching at sounds she couldn't hear. On the 4th morning, just as Grace set a pan of cornbread to cool, a white county vehicle pulled into the gravel drive. The tires cracked the stillness. A man stepped out, tall, late 40s, his shirt crisp, shoes too polished for farm dirt. His badge flashed as he adjusted his jacket pocket. "Mrs. Sanders?" His voice was calm but carried that official tone that made Grace's stomach tighten. "I'm Grace," she said warily. The man smiled, extending a hand that she didn't take. "Officer Thomas Crow, Davidson County. I'm here regarding 3 dogs currently in your possession. Rex, Titan, and Bella." Grace stiffened. "What about them?" He reached into a folder and pulled out papers, each neatly stamped and stapled. "They belonged to my uncle, Officer Robert H. Cole, who recently passed away." I'm his legal heir, and I've come to collect them. For a heartbeat, Grace couldn't move. Your uncle? She repeated quietly. Crow nodded, all business. He loved those animals, but they're police property. I can make arrangements to have them transported to the county shelter until we decide on the next steps. From behind her came a low growl. Rex had appeared silently at the porch steps, fur bristling just enough to warn. Titan stood behind him, head lowered, one paw still wrapped in the bandage Grace had applied. Crow's gaze flicked toward them. They're well trained, I'll give you that, he said, tone cooling. But they're not yours. Grace folded her arms. Officer Cole left a letter. He said if anyone found them, to care for them. He didn't mention you. He smiled thinly. My uncle was a good man, but not of sound mind at the end. Dementia, confusion. It's all documented. If you just sign the release, no. The word came sharper than she meant it, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Crow's face tightened. I'd hate for this to turn into a legal matter. Grace met his gaze evenly. So would I. He studied her for a long moment, then slipped the papers back into his folder. You have until the end of the week, he said, turning toward his car. Then I'll return with a court order. The crunch of gravel under his tires lingered long after he was gone. That night, the house felt colder. The dogs wouldn't rest. Their pacing like the ticking of a clock Grace couldn't silence. Mark sat at the table staring at the stack of documents Crow had left behind. Grace, maybe he's right, he said quietly. If the man's family wants them. He's lying, she interrupted, too quickly. How do you know? I just do, she said. The letter, the photo, they were too deliberate. He loved them too much to let a man like that take them. Mark rubbed his temples. You think I haven't seen families tear each other apart over inheritance? Maybe it's not worth fighting. Grace ignored him, already reaching for her phone. In the quiet hum of the kitchen, she searched for an old contact number she'd written on the back of a clinic receipt days earlier, the Veterans Association. When the line clicked, a woman's steady voice answered. Tennessee Veterans Network, this is Amy. Grace hesitated. Hi, I'm calling about a man named Robert H. Cole, retired K-9 unit. I was told he might have passed away. Time at 100 shown. There was a pause, the sound of fingers typing faintly in the background. Then, Ma'am, Officer Cole hasn't passed. He's alive, but... Another pause, softer now. He's been in hospice care for several weeks. No known relatives have come forward. Grace's heart thudded. Alive? Yes, ma'am, but not doing well. He's under full-time medical supervision. Grace's throat tightened. Where? The woman gave her an address 2 counties over. Grace wrote it down with a trembling hand, the ink smudging under her fingers. When she hung up, the silence in the room was deafening. Mark looked up from the table. What is it? Grace met his eyes. He's alive. For the first time in weeks, Mark had no words. The next morning, fog clung thick over the hills as they loaded the truck. Lily sat between them in the front seat, hugging Snowy tight. In the back, the dogs shifted restlessly, as though they knew. The road wound narrow through forest and mist, the kind of morning where even sound felt muffled. Lily didn't speak. Grace's hands were locked on the wheel, her mind racing between fear and hope. When they pulled into the Willow Grove Hospice Center, the fog parted just enough to reveal a small brick building wrapped in ivy. The sign out front was old, the paint peeling, but the flower beds were neatly kept. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and lavender. A nurse led them down a quiet corridor. Room 7, she said softly. He's awake this morning. though he doesn't get many visitors. Grace paused at the door. Her hand trembled before she turned the knob. The room was small. One bed, one window. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains. In a wheelchair beside the bed sat an elderly man, his hair silver white, his skin pale but alert. When Rex saw him, the transformation was instant. The dog let out a sound between a cry and a bark, not sharp, but aching. Titan followed, tail trembling, eyes bright. Bella pressed forward, whining softly. Cole looked up, startled. Then his eyes widened, disbelief melting into pure emotion. "Rex?" His voice cracked. "Titan." "Bella." The dog surged forward as if pulled by gravity, pressing against his knees, nuzzling his hands. Cole's frail fingers buried themselves in their fur, trembling. Tears cut silent paths down his cheeks. "I thought," he whispered, voice breaking. "I thought I'd lost you." Grace stood frozen, throat tight, watching something holy unfold before her. The reunion of souls who'd never stopped searching for one another. Lily knelt beside Cole's wheelchair, eyes glistening. "They thought you were gone," she said softly. Cole turned to her, his weathered hand reaching out to touch the child's cheek. "Looks like they found where they belong," he whispered. "Maybe that's where I belong too." Rex rested his head on Cole's lap and closed his eyes, a deep sigh escaping his chest. The man's hand rested there, trembling but content. For the first time in years, the rooms, sterile quiet meant for endings, filled instead with life. Grace wiped her eyes before anyone could see. In that small, fragile moment, she realized the truth. Sometimes the living need saving just as much as the lost. The afternoon light inside the hospice room dimmed into a soft, amber glow. The air hummed faintly with the steady rhythm of machines and the muted breathing of those who had learned to wait beside endings. Robert Cole sat in his wheelchair by the window, sunlight tracing fragile gold lines across his hands. His dogs, Rex, Titan, and Bella, rested near his feet like sentinels returned from duty. Grace stood beside the bed, medical chart in hand, her eyes shadowed with concern. She'd noticed it the moment they arrived. Titan's labored breathing, the subtle tremor in his flank every time he shifted position. Even now, his chest rose and fell unevenly. Cole noticed it too. "He's not well," he said quietly. Grace knelt beside Titan, fingers tracing along his ribs. "There's a mass here," she murmured, half to herself. "It's pressing on his organs. He's in pain, even if he won't show it." Cole's voice softened, heavy with both worry and understanding. "How bad?" Grace hesitated, her throat tightening. "It's serious. He'll need surgery, soon. But the procedure's expensive, about $3,000. And with the recovery time, medications." She stopped, embarrassed by her own practicality in a room so full of sacrifice. Cole leaned back, frail body shaking slightly as he reached into the drawer beside his bed. From within, he withdrew a worn leather portfolio, edges cracked from years of use. Inside were documents, neatly folded, and a checkbook so old it looked like it had survived wars. He slid them toward her. "Take this." Grace blinked. "Sir, I can't." He lifted a hand, silencing her. "You can. You must." His handwriting trembled as he signed a paper at the top of the stack. A transfer of ownership, his pen dragging over the names of Rex, Titan, and Bella. Beneath it, he added a note authorizing the Sanders family to access his savings account. When he finished, he looked up at her, eyes tired but shining. "They saved me more than once, Mrs. Sanders," he said softly. "Now let them save you." Grace swallowed hard. You don't owe us anything. He smiled faintly. That's where you're wrong. These dogs found you for a reason. They don't lose their way. Not ever. If they came to your family, it's because they knew where they were needed most. Lily stood near the window, clutching Snowy to her chest. Mr. Cole, she whispered, will Titan get better now? Cole turned to her, his voice gentler than air. He's strong, little one. Stronger than most men I ever served with. Lily knelt to stroke Titan's fur, eyes full of tears. He's brave too, she said. Like you. Cole's lips curved into a faint smile. Then he'll be fine. Outside, the fog had thickened again, pressing its face against the glass. It seemed the world held its breath. Later that evening, back at the veterinary clinic, Titan's condition worsened. His breathing came in shallow bursts, each exhale a soft whine. Grace's hands trembled as she adjusted the oxygen mask. Mark stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, trying to mask his fear. How bad? Grace's voice cracked. If we don't operate tonight, he won't make it till morning. Mark didn't hesitate. Then we do it. Whatever it takes. Grace met his eyes, searching for the doubt she'd grown used to. But it wasn't there. He only nodded once, firmly. Within minutes, the clinic came alive. Lights blazing, machines humming, the smell of disinfectant sharp in the air. Grace slipped into the rhythm of her training. Prepare the anesthesia, sterilize instruments, check vitals. But beneath the precision was something raw, pulsing. Fear, hope, love. As she placed a gentle hand on Titan's head, she whispered, You're going to make it, old boy. You have to. Outside the surgery room, Rex and Sata, Bella waited by the door, unmoving, ears pressed against the seam as if listening for his heartbeat through the wall. At the same time, miles away in his hospice room, Robert Cole's condition began to decline. The nurse found him pale and weak, his breaths slowing. She called Grace's phone immediately, her voice tight with urgency. Grace answered mid-procedure, hands gloved, heart racing. We're in surgery, she said. Titan's on the table. The nurse hesitated. Mr. Cole, he's asking for you. And for the dogs. Grace swallowed hard. Put him on speaker. The nurse placed the phone near Cole's ear. His voice came faint, barely above a whisper. How's my boy? Grace's throat closed. We're doing everything we can. He's fighting. There was a pause, then very softly, That's my Titan. Always was. Lily stood beside Grace, clutching the phone with both hands, her face streaked with tears. He's going to make it, Mr. Cole, she said, voice trembling but strong. He's strong, just like you. The nurse later swore she saw something extraordinary, a faint smile that crept across the dying man's face. His breathing eased, his body relaxed, and for a moment, his eyes lifted toward something no one else could see. Then, as Titan's heartbeat steadied beneath Grace's trembling hands, Robert Cole's heart finally slowed, a soldier's final march ending in quiet peace. Hours passed. The clinic lights dimmed to soft gold. The storm outside had cleared, leaving the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. Grace emerged from the operating room, her face pale but shining with exhausted joy. He made it, she whispered to Mark and Lily. He's going to live. Mark wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Lily sobbed quietly into Snowy's fur. Outside the surgery room, Rex gave a single bark, deep and resonant, and Bella lifted her head, ears pricked toward the stars beyond the clinic window. Grace's phone buzzed. A message from the hospice nurse. Only 4 words. He passed peacefully, smiling. Grace read it twice and then looked at Titan, lying bandaged but breathing, his chest rising steady and strong. She whispered to no one and everyone. He knew. Outside, the wind carried the faintest echo of something like a sigh, or maybe a blessing, through the quiet fields. For a few blessed weeks, the Sanders farm breathed easier. Titan recovered slowly, his bandaged side healing under Grace's careful hands. Each morning, Lily would read to him in the barn. Children's stories, fairy tales, sometimes just her own soft humming. Rex and Bella would lie nearby, silent guardians, their eyes half closed but ever watchful. Grace often paused in the doorway, watching the 3 of them together. Her stepdaughter, once broken by loss, now laughing again. The dogs, once orphans of war, now a family's heart. The world had softened around them. Even Mark smiled more these days, his laughter returning in brief bursts like spring rain after drought. But peace, she would learn, was only the quiet before the storm. It began with a letter, a cream envelope stamped with an official seal addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Mark Sanders. Grace tore it open at the kitchen counter, her hands steady until she read the first line. This notice serves as formal summons regarding a pending claim of ownership over the animals known as Rex, Titan, and Bella. Her pulse quickened. By the time she reached the end, the name signed in dark, confident ink, her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the paper. Thomas Crow. He was back. The following week, the Sanders family stood in a crowded county courthouse, a room that smelled faintly of dust, coffee, and nerves. At Crow's side stood a tall man in a tailored gray suit, Martin Blackwell, one of Nashville's most ruthless estate attorneys. Crow's face was smooth, practiced, his posture confident. They were taken under false pretenses, his attorney began smoothly. Officer Cole's letter of transfer is invalid. He was under palliative care, medicated, and not of sound mind. My client, as next of kin, is the rightful heir to all assets, including the dogs. Grace's jaw clenched, but before she could speak, her lawyer, a modest man named Elliot Rhodes, who'd taken their case pro bono, rose calmly. Your Honor, Rhodes said, we'll prove that Officer Cole acted of clear intent. He left written authorization, bank records, and direct testimony verifying his state of mind. And most importantly, his dog's own behavior supports that intent. They found the Sanders family on their own. They recognized them. Blackwell gave a dry laugh. Dogs can't testify, Counselor. No, Rhodes said evenly, but hearts can. The courtroom murmured, a small ripple of sympathy that Blackwell's smirk couldn't erase. Word spread quickly through the town. Within days, donations poured in, envelopes left on the clinic counter, jars filled with cash at the diner. Neighbors dropped off food, hay, and dog supplies. Local veterans, men with sun-worn faces and medals hidden in drawers, showed up on the courthouse steps in uniform. They're one of ours, one of them said gruffly to a reporter. Those dogs carried the soul of a soldier home. We'll stand with them. The sight brought tears to Grace's eyes. She had spent years believing fear made her small, but now courage surrounded her, in strangers, in her husband, in the child who'd taught her how to love again. The hearings dragged on for weeks. Each day felt like another test of endurance. Grace sat beside Mark, their hands occasionally brushing but never letting go. Crow sat across from them, eyes cold and calculating. He avoided her gaze. But once, when Lily entered with Rex on a leash, his expression faltered. Rex's head turned sharply toward him, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Crow stepped back before catching himself. The courtroom noticed. On the third day, Elliot Rhodes called Mark to the stand. He was reluctant, hands twisting the brim of his hat. "I'm not good with speeches," he began quietly, "but I know loyalty when I see it. Those dogs didn't just show up at our house. They saved us." He paused, his voice thickening. "They brought my daughter back from a place I thought she'd never return from." Blackwell stood. "Mr. Sanders, you claim Officer Cole's dogs saved your family, yet you admit you'd never met the man before." Mark nodded. "That's right, but my father had." The room stilled. "My dad served with Robert Cole," Mark continued, his voice firming with each word. "75th K9 Division. I found the records last week in his old chest. Cole was his partner overseas." A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward. "So maybe this wasn't random," Mark said quietly. "Maybe those dogs recognized more than just a car. Maybe they recognized home." The silence that followed was electric, the kind that settles deep in people's bones. Destiny, it seemed, had looped back upon itself. On the final day, it was Grace's turn. Her palms were slick as she took the stand. She could feel every eye on her. Friends, strangers, veterans, even reporters from Nashville. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied with truth. "When I met those dogs," she began, "I was afraid of them. I've been afraid of dogs most of my life. But something about them was different. They didn't come at me with teeth. They came with purpose. It's like they already knew who I was, even when I didn't." Her eyes glistened. "I'd lost faith in a lot of things. In love. In myself. But they didn't care about my fear. They waited. They watched. And somehow, they gave me back a part of myself I thought was gone." Her voice cracked. "They made me believe again. In life. In love, in myself." A hush fell over the courtroom. Grace wiped at her eyes, embarrassed, but she didn't stop. "My stepdaughter hadn't smiled in over a year. She lost her mother, and nothing I did could reach her. But these dogs, they did in days what therapy couldn't do in months. They connected to her heart." She took a shaky breath. "If Officer Cole were standing here right now, he'd say they were right where they were meant to be." When she finished, even Judge Pearson looked away, clearing his throat before reaching for his gavel. The sound it made was soft, almost respectful. "Court will recess until tomorrow," he said quietly. "And, Mrs. Sanders, thank you." Grace stepped down, trembling. Mark reached for her hand, squeezing it tight. Across the room, Lily smiled through tears, Bella's head resting against her knees. Outside, the courthouse steps were filled with people holding signs. "Heroes deserve a home. Keep the family together." For the first time in months, Grace felt something more powerful than fear. Something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Morning light slanted through the courthouse blinds, cutting across rows of anxious faces. The air inside the courtroom felt electric, thick with anticipation and unspoken prayers. Every seat was filled. Veterans in faded uniforms, neighbors from town, even children clutching handmade signs that read, "Protect our heroes." Grace sat beside Mark at the defense table, her fingers interlaced tightly with his. Across the aisle, Thomas Crow adjusted his tie for the 5th time, eyes darting toward the judge's bench with restless arrogance. His lawyer, Martin Blackwell, stood poised, that familiar smirk glued to his face. Judge Pearson entered, his expression unreadable. The gavel struck once. "Court is now in session." The murmurs ceased. "Before we proceed," the judge began, "the court has received new evidence submitted by the defense." He nodded to Elliot Rhodes, who rose calmly, holding a flash drive between two fingers. "Your Honor," Rhodes said, his voice clear and steady, "this file was recovered from Officer Robert H. Cole's personal effects at Willow Grove Hospice after his passing. It's dated 3 weeks before his death. The recording is addressed to whoever would assume care for his dogs." He approached the bench, handing the drive to the bailiff, who connected it to the courtroom monitor. The judge gave a small nod. "Let's hear it." The speakers crackled to life with the rasp of an old man's voice. Steady, warm, unmistakably Robert Cole. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it home. And if my dogs are still alive, they're probably raising some kind of trouble trying to find one." He chuckled softly, the sound tired, but full of love. "There's a man who's been sniffing around. Thomas Crow. Claims to be my nephew. Don't trust him. He's after money, not the dogs. He offered to sell them once, to a private contractor out of state. I threw him off my porch. If he's trying again, I want it on record that I disowned him." Crow's face drained of color. A few gasps rippled through the courtroom. "Those dogs aren't assets," Cole continued. "They're soldiers, family. They've earned their rest, and they deserve a home that understands loyalty. If you found them, if you're caring for them, you've already done more for me than my own blood. Keep them together. That's my last order." The recording ended in silence. No music, no fade, just the quiet hum of a man's final truth. Judge Pearson leaned back slowly, removing his glasses. "Mr. Blackwell," he said, voice low. "Any response?" Blackwell swallowed. "Your Honor, while that recording is perfectly admissible," the judge cut in, "and crystal clear." He turned toward Crow, eyes narrowing. "This court takes fraud very seriously, Mr. Crow. Consider yourself fortunate if all you lose today are those dogs." Crow shifted in his seat, jaw tight, but said nothing. Judge Pearson exhaled, then looked toward Grace and Mark. "The court rules in favor of the Sanders family. Rex, Titan, and Bella are hereby under their permanent care. Additionally, the court recognizes Officer Cole's recorded statement as his lawful testament." He struck the gavel once more, not just a sound of law, but of justice landing squarely where it belonged. Grace's breath caught. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then Lily's small hand slipped into hers, and everything inside her broke free. Relief, gratitude, exhaustion. Around them, applause erupted. Veterans saluted from the back row. Reporters surged toward the front as cameras clicked like distant thunder. Outside the courthouse, the steps were drenched in soft morning rain. The gray sky hung low, but there was a strange light breaking through. Not sunlight exactly, but something gentler. A glow that felt earned. Lily stood in her yellow raincoat, Bella's leash in hand. Reporters knelt to her level, microphones extended, cameras rolling. "Sweetheart," one of them asked, "how does it feel knowing you get to keep the dogs?" Lily smiled shyly, hugging Bella around the neck. "We're keeping our heroes," she said simply. That one sentence, pure, childlike, perfect, swept through the crowd like a hymn. The veterans applauded again, their eyes wet. Even the reporters lowered their cameras afterward, moved by the sincerity of it. Grace stood a few steps away, watching. Her chest tightened with emotion she couldn't contain. She covered her mouth with one hand, tears spilling freely. Mark came up behind her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. His voice was rough with pride. "You did it, Grace." She shook her head, still crying. "We did it." He kissed her temple softly. "No," he murmured. "They did." They both turned toward the three German shepherds standing at attention in the drizzle. Rex, tall and alert, Titan with his healed side gleaming beneath the gray light, and Bella calm and watchful beside Lily. Together, they looked less like pets and more like guardians carved from memory and devotion. That night, rain whispered against the farmhouse windows, a soft, rhythmic sound that felt more like music than weather. The court papers lay folded neatly on the table beside a framed photograph of Robert Cole, his smiling face lit by a flickering candle. The house was quiet, except for the occasional sigh of sleeping dogs. Titan snored faintly from his place near the fireplace. Bella dozed by the window. Rex, ever the sentinel, rested but never completely slept. Grace stood by the window, watching rain trace thin rivers down the glass. Beyond the field, the barn lights glowed faintly, their home, their promise, their second chance. She whispered, barely audible, "Thank you, Officer Cole. They found their mission, and so did we." The rain answered softly, tapping in rhythm against the pane, as if echoing her words. She turned back toward the living room. Mark had fallen asleep in his chair, Lily curled on the couch with Snowy tucked under her chin, Bella's paw draped protectively across her legs. For the first time since that autumn afternoon in the parking lot, Grace felt something deeper than relief. A peace that lived in the quiet, in the small sounds of breathing, in the warmth of belonging. Outside, three shadows stood against the window light. Not ghosts, but guardians, steady as the earth itself. A year had passed since the courtroom thundered with applause, and the rain baptized their victory. Seasons had turned gently, like pages in a book written by time itself. What was once a struggling Tennessee farm had become something else entirely, a place where healing wore the shape of hope. The old barn stood proudly at the edge of the pasture, its weathered boards sanded and painted white, the roof gleaming under morning sun. The hand-painted sign above its wide entrance read, "The Robert Cole Foundation for Service Dogs. Loyalty Heals." Inside, where hay once gathered in dusty heaps, there were now clean stalls, training mats, and soft, steady light filtering through skylights Mark had built himself. The air carried the scent of straw and antiseptic, but also coffee, laughter, and the deep calm of belonging. Grace moved through the space in her denim jacket and worn boots, a clipboard tucked under her arm, her hair pulled back but with a few strands escaping to frame her face. A group of veterans gathered near the center ring, men and women whose faces told stories of both strength and loss. Some wore prosthetics. Others carried invisible wounds, but all of them smiled when the dogs approached. "Remember," Grace said gently, guiding them through the exercise. "You don't train them by commanding. You teach them by trusting." Her voice carried that steady authority she'd earned, not through rank, but through kindness. A tall man with a sleeve tattoo, Staff Sergeant Morales, knelt as a young shepherd named Duke sat obediently before him. "Feels strange," he admitted, scratching the dog's ear. "First time in years I've held something that listens without judging." Grace smiled softly. "That's what they do. They listen better than we ever did." Around them, the rhythmic sound of paws on mats filled the barn, the occasional bark echoing like a heartbeat. Titan, older now but still noble, watched over the session like a commander retired, but not forgotten. His scarred side gleamed under the sunlight, healed and proud. Bella worked beside Lily in another corner, helping guide a small boy through his first trust exercise. The boy's trembling hands steadied as Lily whispered softly into Bella's ear, the same way she once did when fear lived in her own heart. Grace paused for a moment, watching her stepdaughter with quiet awe. Lily's laughter carried through the air. Light, musical, unguarded. The little girl who once sat silent in a parked car now spoke with confidence to every visitor who came through the barn doors. "You just have to talk to them," she often said. "They understand more than words." It had become something of a legend, how the Sanders family turned a broken farm into a refuge for both humans and dogs. Donations flowed steadily now, enough to fund a training program and small outreach clinic. Grace oversaw everything with the quiet precision of someone who had once been afraid of animals and now couldn't imagine life without them. Mark's truck rumbled into the driveway just as the afternoon sun began to warm the fields. He stepped out, his once slumped shoulders now squared, his face brighter than it had been in years. The exhaustion that had once aged him seemed to have lifted. He worked construction again, but not just any kind. With the help of fellow veterans, he'd started building adaptive housing for disabled soldiers across the county. His designs included ramps, widened doorways, and even small yards designed for service dogs to roam safely. Grace met him halfway up the path, smiling as he kissed her cheek. "How was the site?" "Good," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We finished the frame today. Had a bunch of volunteers. Even the kid from the diner came to help." He looked around the farm, eyes softening. "You've got a full house today?" Grace nodded toward the barn. "Therapy group from Murfreesboro. Second session." Mark leaned against the porch railing, watching the movement in the distance. Dogs weaving between veterans, laughter spilling into open air. "You ever think about how far we've come?" Grace followed his gaze. "Every day." He smiled, slipping an arm around her shoulders. Robert Cole would have been proud. She nodded, eyes glistening. "I think he'd say they found their next mission." Inside the farmhouse, the walls carried pieces of their story. Near the entryway hung a large framed photograph of Officer Robert H. Cole, uniform crisp, eyes kind, with Rex, Titan, and Bella sitting at his feet. Below the frame was a small brass plaque, "For service, for loyalty, for love." Next to it, Lily had placed a drawing she made herself, 3 dogs standing under a wide sky, a farmhouse behind them, and the word home written in uneven letters. Grace often paused in front of that wall when locking up at night. It wasn't just a display, it was a promise. Rex, the eldest, now served as a mentor dog, helping train the younger shepherds who joined the program. Bella specialized in therapy sessions with children, while Titan, though slower, became a quiet companion for veterans battling anxiety. Each of them had found a new purpose, and in their healing, so had the humans who loved them. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the farm glowed golden, every blade of grass alive under the light. Grace and Mark sat on the porch swing, coffee mugs in hand, while Lily ran across the yard, laughing as Bella chased her in playful circles. Titan lay at the porch steps, eyes half closed, tail thumping whenever Lily's laughter hit his ears. Rex stood watch by the fence, scanning the horizon, content yet forever vigilant. Grace leaned her head on Mark's shoulder. "Funny," she murmured. "This place used to feel haunted." Mark smiled. "Maybe it still is, just by the right kind of ghosts." She laughed quietly, the sound blending with the chirping of crickets and the rustle of evening wind. In the distance, the barn lights flickered on automatically, a beacon against the encroaching night. Inside, soft country music played from an old radio as volunteers cleaned up for the day. Grace closed her eyes, letting the breeze brush her face. "1 year," she whispered, "and somehow it feels like both forever and just the beginning." Mark squeezed her hand. "That's because it is." As dusk deepened, the farm settled into the hush of peace. Not the silence of emptiness, but the stillness of fulfillment. A family once fractured by grief had become a circle of healing. A farm once burdened by debt now stood as a sanctuary for second chances. And in the faint light of the porch, the framed photograph inside caught the last glint of the setting sun. Officer Cole and his 3 dogs, watching over them still. Evening fell softly over the Tennessee hills, painting the sky in amber and violet. The farmhouse glowed with golden light, laughter spilling into the open fields, a sound once unimaginable here. Inside, the Sanders family gathered around the old oak table. The smell of roasted chicken and cornbread filled the air. Lily giggled as she tried to feed Bella under the table. "She said she's still hungry," she insisted. Mark laughed. "That dog's gonna start talking if you keep that up." The laughter that followed was quiet, genuine, the kind born in places once broken, but healed by time and love. Grace looked around the table, at Mark's peaceful face, Lily's bright eyes, the faint scratches on the floor where Rex once patrolled. Every detail spoke of a home rebuilt, not by chance but by love. Later, dishes cleared, the house settled into a gentle calm. Lily dozed on the couch, Bella at her side, Snowy in her arms. The flickering TV painted them in soft light, a picture of Grace reclaimed. Grace stood in the doorway, tears glimmering. Mark came up beside her, arm around her waist. "You okay?" he asked. "Just remembering," she whispered. They watched their daughter sleep. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Mark said. Grace nodded. "Feels like a lifetime." Rain began to tap the tin roof. After a pause, she murmured, "You know, they were never lost dogs." Mark turned to her. "What do you mean?" "They were messengers," she said. "They came to fix something in us." He looked toward the barn glowing faintly outside. "Guess they did their job." She smiled. "And they gave us back everything we thought we'd lost." Thunder rumbled softly across the hills. That night, rain whispered against the windows. Lily slept. Soundly, Bella curled nearby. Grace moved through the quiet house, turning off lamps. Passing the hallway photo, Officer Robert H. Cole with Rex, Titan, and Bella, she brushed her fingers across the frame. "You'd be proud of them," she whispered. A breeze stirred the curtain. Through the window, she saw the barn lit faintly, and 3 shadows standing beneath the awning. Rex, tall and steady, Titan, broad and calm, Bella, alert but at peace. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw a man beside them, a uniformed figure, hand resting on Rex's head. Then he was gone. The candle flickered. Grace felt the whisper, not in her ears, but in her heart. Mission complete. Tears rose, but she smiled. "Thank you," she breathed, "for finding us." Outside, the dogs turned toward the barn. The door closed softly behind them, the light fading to a tranquil glow. Grace stood for a long moment, one hand over her heart, the rain's rhythm steady as a lullaby. "Rest easy, boys," she whispered. "You've earned it." And beneath the Tennessee rain, in a farmhouse once shadowed by loss, a family slept whole again, their hearts mended by loyalty, courage, and love that refused to fade. You know, stories like this remind us why dogs, especially German shepherds, are more than companions. They're guardians of our hearts. They see the truth in us when we can't see it ourselves. Their loyalty doesn't fade when life gets hard. It grows deeper. And sometimes, they're the ones who help us find our way back to who we really are. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt that quiet understanding, that wordless love, maybe it's time to explore it a little more. There's a wonderful resource came across that helps people connect more deeply with their dogs. No pressure, of course. Just something worth visiting when you have a quiet moment. Because in the end, what these dogs give us isn't just company, it's healing. It's faith. It's a reminder that love, once earned, never really leaves. Take care of your four-legged friend tonight. They've probably been taking care of you all along.